So, welcome everyone. We're here with Simon Pearce, who's the pro-genealogist at Ancestry. We've got some exciting news, and we wanted to talk about it with Simon today. So, Simon, from the start of January, Ancestry will have the 1921 census. So, we wanted to talk a little bit about that. And one of the first questions we had was, what makes this census kind of so special and significant compared to the earlier ones?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. It's nice to speak to you about this. I'm really excited about the 1921 census. And to
Mm,
answer your question, when we compare this census to 1911, for example, there are some additions that are quite exciting for family historians. So anything from really the address, the location that someone's employed at or working at is quite exciting because, of course, we want to kind of build up these pictures of our ancestors and where they worked and what their lives were like. And this little addition, this addition of where they were working, the address is a really nice addition in the census. So I'm really excited by that. When we keep looking over the census forms, you can see, for example, a tiny thing that I really like is when you look at the age, for the first time, we're seeing the months of someone's age as well. So they might be 20 and 4 months. And I think as a family historian, as a genealogist, I really like that because sometimes these little clues can just help you when you're looking at other records. So whether it was a birth index or a baptism record, those months might just help you target your searches.
mm.
So it sounds like a little thing, but I really am excited by that addition. And also for the first time, we're seeing recorded as a marital status divorced, which is quite a kind of progressive kind of move forward, if you like, in the 1921 census. We hadn't seen that before, so that's really interesting. And when we look at other censuses too, there's a section on the household schedule on the far right hand side where people could record the number of children under the age of 16 in a household. Now, you're seeing the names already listed on the left hand side, but sometimes those children might be in another household. They might be with a grandparent, or they might be somewhere else, so to speak. And so it just this little extra clue, you might think, oh, why was such and such not there on census night? It just helps you to know that they did have other children or stepchildren. So there's a few little extra additions on this 1921 census that are really making it stand out and quite exciting for family historians.
Excellent, excellent. And how do you think that obviously the timing of it was a very significant period in history. So the obviously the First World War just finished, Spanish flu pandemic as well. So how does that kind of affect the information that it provides, do you think?
Well, that's actually really interesting. I specialize in military research, and when I look into and I've been spending hours and hours diving into the census, the impact of the First World War is so evident in the census, and
Mm,
it's quite moving and quite striking actually. So, to give you an example, I found a number of war widows, for example, so women that recorded themselves as war widows that had lost their husbands in the war. So it's really evident the level of loss really comes across when you look at people that have described themselves as war widows. But to another extent, I've seen some figures that suggest that up to 2 million soldiers, servicemen returned with permanent disabilities. And you are seeing that in the census as well. Men that record themselves as unable to work due to war service and to words of that effect. And it really
yeah,
grew. And to the extent that I found St Dunstan's, which is now Blind Veterans UK. They had a hospital in Regent's Park. You can see the hospital as well, and the men that were there and learning trades, who were blinded for blinded servicemen, and the staff there as well. So that's something we wouldn't have seen previously. Um, Another thing that's really striking in terms of the First World War is the levels of unemployment. I mean, it was a
okay,
high level of unemployment in
yeah,
the spring of 1921, and just afterwards, when the census was taken, you're really seeing that. You're seeing again, men, women that have come back and have said, particularly soldiers are seeing, served in the war as a soldier, unable to find work. Or there was one gentleman whose entry I read that really struck me, actually. I'll read it out to you because it was quite striking when I read what he'd written. So he was previously a farrier before and during the war, now doing anything I can get, which I thought was quite striking. Again, just this post First World War era where there was perhaps fewer opportunities, there was a high unemployment. He was just taking whatever he could get, and that it does come across. The nation comes across as a nation kind of healing, if you like, and coming to terms with the war, not just the loss, but how to adapt really as well. And I think that's really come through when you look at the census.
yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? And that'll shed so much light on people's family history, won't it? And give some kind of context to to the records they've seen before, I guess.
It will do, it will, and it's we've been working, I've been working backwards. That when I find these individuals, I'm then looking in our, we have quite an extensive kind of array of military records. I've been finding them in the military records because I want to know, what did they do, where did they served,
Mm,
if they were wounded, well, looking at their the pension records as well. So it all ties in quite neatly with other records, but you can really start to build up that story when you look at the census and you learn about these individuals, and then you look at other records too, and kind of you do take the next step and find out more about their lives, whether it was before or after the census.
yeah, yeah, excellent. So are there any kind of anything unexpected or surprises that you found in the census, in the records?
I think that in terms of unexpected, I've been waiting to be, and I'm still digging in quite deep into the records. That I don't know if you've ever seen in the 1911 census a lot of the protests, particularly from suffragettes, the no vote, no census messages. And I'm yet to come across messages like that in the census. But of course, 1918 women were given over the age of 13 with certain property met property requirements were given the vote. So I'm not seeing the same level of suffragette protests, if you like, from 1911. And I'm waiting for those. But I think to touch on what I was talking about before, the most striking thing really has been just the level of people that record their involvement in the war, what they did,
Mm,
how they were affected by it. That's quite striking, and it just kind of really does just reinforce like what an impact it had on the nation. But and again, to go back to what I mentioned earlier, I think the inclusion of divorce as a marital status is really important. Although divorce was still not as common at this point for many people because of expense and perhaps because of social stigmas, if you like, it is that was regarded as something you could record it instead of married, widowed, single. You could also record divorce. So that's surprising but very interesting at the same time.
mm, excellent. So obviously the 1921 census, for someone who's beginning their genealogy, it might be one of the first ports of call. It's maybe a bit easier, less daunting as some of the older records. So what tips would you give for a family historian who's just starting out and wants to kind of use the 1921 census?
Yeah, do you know it really is? I'd say 21 census, maybe the 39 register, really good starting points. They're quite nice entries into family history. And one of the things
Mm,
about them is that you might even find a parent or a grandparent in there, someone that you recognize, and that's probably quite special and poignant as well. I'd say that sometimes when you're searching less is more, I think there can be a temptation to maybe add as much as you possibly know or as many details as possible, and sometimes maybe searching with a name, an age, perhaps a couple of years either side of that age, maybe add a location. Sometimes I find less is more when I search. You don't have to put in, every single field that you see on the search field. So maybe that's worth bearing in mind as well. I'd say as well that the census is fantastic in terms of learning about our family members in 1921, where they were living, what they were doing,
mm,
what they were employed in. But remember as well that it is a gateway to other records too. So the clues that you find in there, you can use to look at maybe the 1911 census, or maybe jump forward 20 years and look at the 1939 register, or perhaps look at parish registers or military records. So there are lots of clues in there that really can help you to kind of flesh out the story of your ancestors, and you can add that to your family tree. It may generate hints and help you further with your research. So it's really
mm.
exciting, the kind of avenues of research it can open up as well.
Excellent. And do you think that on the kind of the other side of that, there are any unique challenges that these kind of records set? Presume you'd like to think that they're clearer and everything's more a little bit more modern, but are there any kind of quirks or challenges that people might face?
I think one of the challenges for me is the sadness in that, like, some of my ancestors that died in the First World War don't appear, and I think, oh,
Oh,
if
okay.
like those that were lost, what would they have been doing? What would I have learned about them? And that's one of the things I think, even though I know from research that they're not going to be there, you think, oh, if only what would I have learned about them? Um,
Yeah.
some people might have the usual challenges that we have as family historians of not being able to find someone. I think sometimes you have to persevere, think outside the box. You may not find someone in some location, so you may have to bear in mind they could be somewhere else. It could be they were staying somewhere else on the night that the census was taken. So that can be a challenge too. But again, just taking your time, thinking laterally, you might be able to find them in the household of, of a child, or, those are some of the challenges you might find in, maybe not being able to find someone, but um, you may have to work backwards, pick up some clues from the 1911 census. That might then help you find them in 1921. And I guess as a sort of as a challenge, but it's worth bearing in mind as well that it's the last for many of us, or it could be one of the last big censuses that
Yeah.
is released in our lifetimes. I mean, I
Mm.
feel so privileged to be alive when this is released and get this insight into my family in the 20s. But for those that are, listening and reading that are fairly new to family history, the 1931 census destroyed in the Second World War, the 1941 census didn't happen because of the war. So the next census is going to be the 1951 census, available in 2052. So this is the last big census, big nationwide collection of, family history records, in terms of like households for quite some time. And that's there's something quite kind of significant, I think, in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. We're lucky to have it, aren't we?
Yeah, really are. We really
Records.
are.
So when you using Ancestry, people who are used to using the platform, how will the kind of search interface work with the sensors? Is it quite straightforward?
Yeah,
Um,
it's the same as it's the same as other censuses. So when you go onto Ancestry, you have the search form where you can insert things like their name, a year of birth. You can search by other household members or location. I quite like to use the keyword field. I like to put a location there, which helps you, search the place of birth or place of residence. So it'll feel familiar in the sense of the way that you search it. It's worth bearing in mind as well, actually, that the forms will look, it will look, as we know, like 1911 census and 1921 are the only censuses at the moment that we see that have the original household schedules where our family members actually completed them. Before then, you might see the black and white, so 1901, 1891, etc., the black and white versions that were copied up into these census books by census officials. So there's also something quite familiar to an extent, but quite special as well about seeing
mm,
our ancestors' actual writing, their
mm,
handwriting, their signature. There's it kind of almost makes you feel a bit closer to them in some ways as well. So that's something that might strike people. And actually, one thing I've just remembered as well that you've jogged my memory when you mentioned any quirks. But if we look at 1911, for example, the address is in the bottom right-hand corner, but you'll find it on the back of the census page. This time it's on the back. So when you're looking at the census schedule, you just have to click the right hand arrow and it'll provide you with the address. But the address will be part of our transcriptions as well. When you search, you'll be able to see the address in the transcription, in the indexing. But it's just worth bearing in mind. It might, although there's some similarities to 1911, there's a few little differences as well in the way it looks.
yeah, okay. And if people are obviously going to be diving into it and using these new records, what other records? I know Ancestry has millions and millions of records and information. So are there any other record sets that are around that time that people could use whilst looking at the census as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 60 billion records across 88 countries, and there's lots to get stuck into. But I would say that when you find your ancestors in 1921, you may want to go backwards 10 years, look at them in the 1911 census and other censuses, or even jump forward and look at the 1939 register. But you could also maybe have a look at the military records for the First World War, because many of those perhaps that appear in 1921 would have served, as
Hmm.
we mentioned. So you might find their British Army service record or a Royal Naval record or a medal record. That's all very interesting. You may then be able to use the information about their ages and places of birth in the census to look at our parish records, which are, baptism, marriage, and burial records. So it may help you to pin down their baptism record, or find a marriage record too. And one of the things I like to use, we have quite an extensive collection of electoral registers. And these are quite good for tracking ancestors in between the censuses, because taken every 10 years, although they're really, a fantastic source, they are taken every 10 years. So our ancestors could have moved around in between in those 10 years. So I do find the electoral registers are a really good source for tracking the ancestors, where they were living. And particularly after 1920, when our female ancestors were given the vote as well from 1918 onwards. And so that's really interesting to see them there as well. So really, electoral registers are really good source too. But if you are interested there, when you're on the Ancestry website, if you click on search at the top and then card catalogue,
Mm.
It's a little bit of a hidden gem in some ways. I like to use it to find, it's a very good way of finding records because there's a little keyword section where you can search for anything from baptism, post office, navy, keywords to see if we have records on those particular topics. So if you are, particularly if you're starting out and you're kind of thinking, okay, well, what records do they have? What records could I use? It's worth having a look in the card catalog because that might help you point you in the direction. And one thing that's come to mind is one passenger list because people were moving
Yeah.
around, and particularly initiatives, for people going to different parts of the former British Empire, like Canada and Australia. You may see people that ancestors that are there in 1921. But then in the 1920s, they go off for new opportunities in Canada, Australia, or maybe they went just before the census, and you're wondering why they aren't there, and you then may find them in the passenger list too. So that's just worth bearing in mind too. So lots of things to kind of coincide with it and get stuck into.
Brilliant. Excellent. That's so good, Simon. So exciting to be able to get into these records. And it's all happening in January, is that right?
That's right. Yes, they'll be available to search from the 7th of January. So yes,
Yeah.
not too long to go now.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for your time. We're really looking forward to kind of seeing the all the records and diving into it, and we'll be covering it quite a lot on Family Tree and in our emails. So do look out for that. But Simon, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Matthew. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.